Welcome to Detective Tales, where mysteries unfold and every detail matters. Inspired by the timeless works of Agatha Christie, this channel brings you classic-style detective stories filled with suspense, hidden motives, and unexpected revelations. Here, you'll walk alongside brilliant minds like Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple, unraveling puzzles where nothing is quite as it seems. Prepare yourself for intrigue, atmosphere, and a journey into the golden age of detective fiction. The case begins now.
Chapter 1. A New Beginning. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the village of Willowbrook, its rays dancing upon the dew-kissed petals of blooming roses that framed the neat, ivy-clad cottages. Life in Willowbrook moved with the comforting regularity of the seasons, each day a harmonious blend of familiar faces and gentle routines. In these picturesque homes stood the charming residence of Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, a house that had long been admired for its vibrant garden and welcoming facade. Mr. Henry Thomas was a man of steady demeanour and quiet strength, well regarded in the village for his dedication as the local schoolmaster. His wife, Eleanor, possessed a grace that seemed almost ethereal, her presence bringing the serene beauty to their home. Together they were the embodiment of marital harmony, their lives intertwined in mutual respect and unspoken understanding, yet beneath this veneer of tranquillity lay a sorrow that had altered their once joyful existence. 3 years prior, during the birth of their first child, tragedy had struck. The loss of their baby boy had left Eleanor in a state of deep trauma, her spirit weighed down by grief that cast long shadows over their daily lives. The laughter that once echoed through their halls had been replaced by a heavy silence, and the vibrant garden now seemed to wilt under the strain of their sorrow. Determined to mend their fractured hearts, Henry resolved to adopt a child. After months of careful consideration and numerous visits to the adoption agency, the Thomases were introduced to a baby girl named Emily. She was a delicate child with large, inquisitive eyes and a soft, reassuring smile that seemed to promise a brighter future. With hearts full of hope, they welcomed her into their home, believing that her presence would help heal the wounds of their past. The first weeks with Emily were a balm to their aching hearts. She adapted quickly, her cheerful babbles and tender coos filling the house with new life. Eleanor began to find moments of joy again, her smiles growing more frequent, as she watched Emily explore her surroundings with unbridled curiosity. Henry, too, felt a renewed sense of purpose, dedicating himself to providing a loving and stable environment for their new daughter. However, as the days turned into weeks, subtle changes began to emerge. Emily, once so lively, adopted a more reserved demeanour. She seldom engaged in the playful antics that delighted other children her age. Instead, she observed with a seriousness that belied her tender years. At Willowbrook Primary School, her teachers noted a similar pattern. Emily was often seen alone during recess, and there were whispers among the pupils of her frequent scuffles with other children. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Eleanor tended to the garden, she shared her concerns with Henry over a pot of tea. "Have you noticed how Emily has become so serious, Henry? It's unlike her to be so withdrawn." Henry sighed, gazing thoughtfully into his tea. "I have, Eleanor. Perhaps it's just her settling in, finding her place. We must give her time." Their conversations about Emily's behaviour became more frequent, tinged with worry. Despite their reassurances, a sense of unease settled over the Thomases. Eleanor's trauma from their loss made her particularly sensitive to any signs of distress within the family. She often wondered if Emily's reticence was a reflection of her own lingering sorrow or something more. One evening, as the village prepared for the upcoming harvest festival, the Thomases decided to host a small gathering to celebrate their growing family. Invitations were sent to neighbors and friends, and the house buzzed with preparations. Lanterns were hung in the garden, and the scent of freshly baked scones wafted through the air. It was to be a night of joy, a stark contrast to the years of mourning they had endured. As guests began to arrive, the Thomases greeted each visitor with warmth and hospitality. Conversations flowed easily, laughter mingling with the gentle strains of live music. Yet amidst the merriment, Emily remained conspicuously detached. She lingered near the edge of the garden, her gaze fixed on the flickering lanterns, her expression unreadable. Miss Marple, the village's beloved spinster and amateur sleuth, observed the gathering from her window. With her keen eye and insightful mind, she had long been attuned to the subtle dynamics that played out within Willowbrook's close-knit community. Tonight, she noted the Thomases' unease and Emily's distant demeanor, her curiosity piqued by the undercurrents she sensed beneath the surface of their seemingly idyllic life. After the party, as the last of the guests departed, and the village settled into the quiet of the night, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep. She wandered into the garden, where Emily sat alone, staring into the darkness. Gently, she approached her daughter, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Emily, dear," she whispered, her voice soft with concern, "is something troubling you?" Emily looked up, her eyes meeting Eleanor's with an intensity that unsettled her mother. "I'm fine, Mum. Just tired." Eleanor sighed, knowing that comforting her daughter in such moments was both necessary and futile. As she turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that Emily's silence was a mask for something deeper, something that the Thomases were yet to understand. Back inside, Henry stood by the fireplace, lost in thought. Miss Marple had already left her window, but the observant old lady's words echoed in his mind. "Sometimes," Miss Marple had said, "the heart hides its secrets well." Henry pondered these words, unaware of the intricate web of mysteries that were beginning to entangle his once peaceful life. As the village of Willowbrook slumbered under a blanket of stars, the Thomases faced an uncertain future. The arrival of Emily had brought new hope, yet it had also introduced complexities that threatened to unravel the fragile threads of their happiness. Little did they know that the shadows of their past were poised to cast long and unforeseen consequences, with Miss Marple watching ever so closely from the sidelines. Chapter 2. The twins arrive. Spring had awakened Willowbrook with a flourish of blossoms and the cheerful chorus of robins returning from their winter sojourn. The Thomases' garden, once a testament to quiet sorrow, now burst with vibrant colours as Oliver and Lily, the much-anticipated twins, began to explore their new surroundings. The air was filled with the scent of lilacs and freshly mown grass, and the village seemed to hum with an undercurrent of excitement. Mr. Henry Thomas stood in the doorway of their home, watching his wife, Eleanor, cradle the tiny twins with a mixture of awe and exhaustion. Their arrival had breathed new life into the Thomases' cottage, transforming it into a bustling hub of laughter and activity. Neighbours stopped by to offer their congratulations, bringing baskets of homemade preserves and cheerful bouquets. Eleanor's eyes sparkled as she looked at Oliver, whose chubby cheeks and bright— "Emily, we never meant to make you feel unwanted. We tried to include you in everything, but perhaps we missed something." Emily stood abruptly, her small frame shaking with pent-up emotion. "I couldn't bear to see anyone else with you, Father. I thought if I took away what you loved, you'd only have me." Inspector Collins stepped forward, his expression softening. "Emily, we need to ensure your safety and the safety of your family. Professional help is essential to address these emotional struggles. Miss Marple placed a comforting hand on Eleanor's shoulder before addressing Emily once more. "Emily, understanding and expressing your emotions in a healthy way is crucial. Your actions have caused immense pain, but recognizing the root of these feelings is the first step toward healing." As the police gently escorted Emily away, the room descended into a heavy silence. Henry sank further into his chair, overwhelmed by grief and guilt, while Eleanor clutched her hands together, tears streaming down her face. Miss Marple approached the Thomases, her eyes filled with empathy. "Grief can distort our perceptions and actions," she remarked softly. "Emily's condition is both tragic and pitiable. It serves as a reminder of the importance of understanding and supporting those who struggle with their emotions." Henry looked up, his eyes hollow yet tinged with a glimmer of understanding. "What will happen now?" Miss Marple offered a reassuring smile. "Emily will receive the care she needs, both medically and emotionally. As for you and Eleanor, lean on each other and the support of your community. Healing takes time, but with patience and love, you will find peace." As she prepared to leave, Miss Marple made a mental note to revisit the Child Centre for further insights. The threads of the past were beginning to unravel, revealing the complex emotions that had led to the recent tragedies. Walking out into the blooming garden, she reflected on the delicate balance between appearance and reality, ready to illuminate the shadows that still lingered in the tranquil village of Willowbrook. Chapter 7. Resolution and Renewal. The gentle embrace of spring had fully settled over Willowbrook, breathing new life into its blooming gardens and sunlit paths. The tragic events that had once cast long shadows over the Thomases' household were now gradually giving way to the promise of renewal and healing. Miss Marple had departed the Thomases' home, her mission complete, leaving behind a family grappling with loss, yet hopeful for the future. Inside the restored cottage, the atmosphere was markedly different. Mrs. Eleanor Thomas, having recovered from her injuries sustained during the fire, moved gracefully through the rooms, her resilience a beacon of strength for her husband and daughters. Oliver's memory lingered in every corner, a poignant reminder of the fragility of life. Yet the family found solace in the birth of their twins, Henry and Lily, whose laughter, once again, filled the home with joy. One sunny afternoon, the Thomases decided to host a grand party, inviting the entire village of Willowbrook to celebrate their blessings and share in their renewed happiness. The garden, meticulously tended and adorned with strings of fairy lights and lanterns, was a testament to their perseverance. Neighbors arrived with baskets of homemade preserves, freshly baked scones, and vibrant bouquets, contributing to the festive ambiance. Miss Marple attended the party, her presence a comforting reminder of her unwavering support. Clad in a tasteful floral dress, she moved gracefully among the guests, her keen eyes observing the interactions with her characteristic sharpness. The village was abuzz with cheerful chatter, the air filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers and the soft strains of live music. As the evening progressed, Miss Marple found herself engaged in conversation with Mrs. Pembroke, the local librarian. "It's wonderful to see the Thomases finding happiness again," Mrs. Pembroke remarked, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "They've been through so much." Miss Marple nodded gently. "Indeed. But one must remember that healing is a journey, not a destination. The heart can take time to mend after such profound loss." Meanwhile, Eleanor moved gracefully from group to group, ensuring that every guest felt welcomed and appreciated. Henry stood by the refreshment table, exchanging pleasantries with Mr. Green, the village postmaster. Lily, now a bright and cheerful child, played under the old oak tree with other village children, her giggles ringing through the garden. Amidst the festivities, the absence of Emily was palpable. The room held a collective awareness of her lingering sadness, a silent testament to the unresolved emotions that still haunted the Thomases. Miss Marple noticed this and exchanged a knowing glance with Mrs. Hughes, the matron of the child centre, who had arrived to offer her support. As twilight descended, lanterns cast a warm glow over the garden, and the last guests began to depart, leaving behind a sense of contentment and community. Eleanor stood alone for a moment, watching Lily play, her heart filled with gratitude, yet still touched by sorrow. Miss Marple approached her, offering a comforting smile. "You've done well, Eleanor. Healing takes time, but you and Henry are on the right path," Miss Marple said softly. Eleanor nodded, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and lingering pain. "Thank you, Miss Marple. Your guidance has been invaluable." Miss Marple placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes the heart needs time to reconcile with its past, continue to cherish each other, and support Lily as she grows into the kind and compassionate child she is." As the last traces of evening faded into night, the Thomases retreated into their home, enveloped in the warmth of their family and the support of their community. Henry sat by the fireplace, reflecting on the events that had transpired and the role Miss Marple had played in unravelling the mystery that had threatened their peace. Miss Marple walked through the now quiet village, her thoughts lingering on the Thomases' journey from tragedy to healing. She considered the delicate balance between appearance and reality, the hidden struggles that lay beneath the surface of even the most picturesque lives. The case had been a poignant reminder of the complexities of human emotion and the profound impact of unspoken pain. As she strolled past blooming gardens and sunlit lanes, Miss Marple felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The village of Willowbrook, with its charming streets and close-knit community, had once again revealed the intricate layers of its inhabitants. She knew that life would continue to unfold with its blend of joy and sorrow, but she took comfort in knowing that understanding and compassion could bridge even the deepest of divides. Under the canopy of stars, Willowbrook settled into its peaceful rhythm, the Thomases finding solace in their renewed happiness and the promise of brighter days ahead. Miss Marple, ever the silent guardian, returned to her own quaint cottage, her heart content with the knowledge that she had helped a family find their way back to each other, illuminating the shadows that once threatened to engulf their lives. Lay a tangled web of sorrow and secrets. Determined to uncover the truth, Miss Marple persuaded Mr. Thomas to hire her as a private investigator. On a crisp morning, she arrived at the charred remnants of the Thomases' cottage, now rebuilt, but still bearing the scars of the devastating fire. The air was thick with the lingering scent of smoke, and the once vibrant garden appeared subdued, its flowers struggling to reclaim their former glory. Miss Marple approached the storeroom, her steps measured and deliberate. She moved with a meticulous grace, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. As she sifted through the rubble, her gaze settled on a half-empty bottle of petrol, partially buried under a collapsed beam. The cracked glass and spilled contents immediately raised suspicions. "A deliberate act," she murmured to herself, noting the significance of the find. Returning to the main house, Miss Marple found Mr. Thomas pacing the hallway, his face etched with worry. "Mr. Thomas," she began gently, holding up the petrol bottle, "this suggests that the fire was no accident. We need to delve deeper into what might have motivated such an act." Henry glanced at the bottle, his confusion evident. "But why? Who would want to harm us?" Miss Marple sat beside him, her demeanour calm yet probing. "To understand the motive, we must first understand those involved. Let us discuss Emily's background in more detail." Henry sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Emily was adopted after we lost our first child. The adoption agency was very discreet, providing us with only minimal information about her past. We wanted to give her a loving home, but she's always been a bit different." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her mind already weaving connections. "Different can often mean misunderstood. To gain more insight, I believe a visit to the child centre where Emily was raised is necessary." A few days later, Miss Marple arrived at the Willowbrook Child Centre, a modest building nestled among blooming lilacs. She was greeted by Mrs. Agnes Hughes, the kind-hearted matron who had overseen the care of many children with unwavering dedication. "Good morning, Miss Marple. How may I assist you today?" Mrs. Hughes asked warmly. "Good morning, Mrs. Hughes," Miss Marple replied with a gentle smile. "I'm here to gather some information about one of your former residents, a girl named Emily. She was adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, correct?" Mrs. Hughes nodded, her expression softening as she recalled the child. "Yes, Emily was quite an observant child. She didn't engage in play as much as the others, and often seemed lost in thought. There were times when she became quite aggressive with the other children, especially when they tried to include her in activities she wasn't interested in." Miss Marple made a mental note of this, her mind connecting the dots. "Did Emily ever mention anything about her family, or why she was at the centre?" "She was very guarded about her past," Mrs. Hughes admitted. "We never knew much about her family circumstances. She was brought here after some unfortunate events, but details were kept private to protect her." "Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. This information is very helpful," Miss Marple said softly. "Was there anything else unusual about her behaviour or demeanour that might shed light on her current situation?" Mrs. Hughes pondered for a moment, before replying, "Emily had moments of deep sadness and frustration, especially after the loss of her brother. It was as if she was struggling to cope with her emotions, which sometimes manifested as aggression." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. "Thank you, Mrs. Hughes. You've been most helpful." As she left the child centre, Miss Marple's mind was abuzz with questions and possibilities. Emily's reserved nature and occasional aggression hinted at deeper emotional struggles. Coupled with the discovery of the petrol bottle, the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to form a troubling picture. Returning to the Thomases' home, Miss Marple felt a renewed sense of determination. The gentle village of Willowbrook, with its picturesque charm, now held a darker, more intricate story, one that Miss Marple was resolute to unravel with her characteristic blend of keen observation and compassionate insight. Chapter 6. Threads of the Past. The Thomases' drawing-room, though recently rebuilt, still bore the subtle scars of the devastating fire. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains, casting intricate patterns on the polished oak furniture. The air was thick with tension as Miss Marple orchestrated the formal gathering. Present were Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, their faces etched with worry, Inspector Collins and Emily, who sat quietly in the corner, her eyes downcast. Miss Marple stood gracefully by the mantelpiece, her demeanour calm, yet authoritative. She had meticulously pieced together the fragments of Emily's troubled past, and now it was time to confront the truths that lay hidden beneath the surface. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice gentle but firm. "We are here to understand the recent tragedies that have befallen the Thomas family and to uncover the truth behind them." Mr. Thomas glanced nervously at his wife before meeting Miss Marple's steady gaze. "We're desperate to make sense of what's happened," he admitted, his voice wavering. Miss Marple turned her attention to Emily, who remained silent, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Emily," she addressed softly, "I have learned quite a bit about your past." It seems that where you came from you were known for being quite aggressive towards other children." Emily's eyes lifted slowly, meeting Miss Marple's with a mixture of fear and defiance. "That's not true," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Aggression can often be a manifestation of deeper emotional struggles. However, there is another aspect to your situation that we need to discuss." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle in the room. "Your age reveals that you are actually 30 years old, despite your childlike appearance." A collective gasp echoed through the room, the revelation hanging heavily in the air. Mr. Thomas looked bewildered, struggling to comprehend the truth about his adopted daughter. Eleanor reached out, her hand trembling as she touched Emily's shoulder. "Emily, is this true?" Emily nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, Father, I've always felt different, trapped in a body that doesn't match who I am inside," Miss Marple continued, her tone compassionate, yet probing. "Furthermore, the half-empty petrol bottle found amidst the rubble was not a mere coincidence. Its presence strongly suggests intentional arson, rather than an accidental fire. This points to a deliberate act aimed at your household." Henry sank into a nearby chair, his face pale with disbelief. "But why? Who would want to harm us?" Miss Marple leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "Emily, it appears that your actions were driven by intense emotions. The loss of Oliver and the arrival of the twins may have exacerbated feelings of jealousy and fear of being replaced. In your struggle to maintain your bond with your father, you saw the twins as a threat to your place in the family." Eleanor's voice trembled as she spoke, and, always attuned to the subtleties of human behavior, could not dismiss the possibility of foul play. She had watched Emily's interactions with a discerning eye, noting the child's persistent severity and unexplained hostility towards her peers. Now, with the cottage in ruins and the family reeling from loss, Miss Marple sensed that the threads of mystery were tightening. Determined to uncover the truth, Miss Marple made her way to the infirmary. The waiting room was a sombre place, filled with hushed conversations and the occasional sniffle. She approached Henry Thomas, who sat hunched over a chair, his face etched with grief and exhaustion. "Good morning, Henry," Miss Marple greeted softly, taking a seat beside him. Her presence was both comforting and probing, a combination that often yielded more information than polite conversation alone. "Miss Marple?" Henry replied, his voice weary. "Thank you for coming." She offered a sympathetic smile. "I can only imagine how difficult these past few months have been for you and your family." Henry nodded, his eyes clouded with sorrow. "The fire, it was all so sudden. I can't believe Eleanor and Emily are safe, but the house, it's gone." Miss Marple leaned forward, her gaze intent. "I understand that accidents can happen, but sometimes things are not as they seem. May I ask, were there any unusual occurrences or tensions in the household before the fire?" Henry hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Not that I can think of. Eleanor and Emily were struggling, yes, especially after Oliver's accident. But I never imagined something like this." Miss Marple pondered his words, her mind already sifting through possibilities. "Sometimes grief can manifest in unexpected ways, but it's important to ensure that everyone is safe and that no one is left with unanswered questions." As if on cue, a nurse approached, informing Miss Marple that Eleanor and Emily were resting comfortably and would soon be able to speak. Grateful, Miss Marple excused herself, her thoughts swirling with doubt and determination. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple visited the wreckage of the Thomases' cottage, now reduced to smouldering embers. The scene was one of utter devastation, with only the skeleton of the structure remaining. As she walked through the ruins, her keen eye caught sight of something partially buried beneath the debris, a half-empty bottle of petrol, its glass cracked and contents spilled. A frown creased her brow. "Interesting," she murmured to herself. The presence of petrol suggested a deliberate act rather than a mere accident caused by a faulty heater or a stray spark. Her suspicions deepened as she recalled Emily's persistent demeanour and the subtle tensions within the household. Miss Marple decided to pay another visit to the infirmary, where Eleanor was recovering. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft breathing of the injured woman. Miss Marple sat beside her, gently holding her hand. "How are you feeling, Eleanor?" she asked kindly. Eleanor looked up, her eyes red from crying. "Better, thank you. It was a miracle we survived." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "I'm relieved to hear that. Fires are such devastating events, but sometimes they leave more questions than answers. Is there anything you can recall about the night of the fire that might seem unusual or out of the ordinary?" Eleanor frowned, searching her memory. "It was late, very late. I remember feeling a draught near the kitchen, but I thought it was just the old windows. The twins were asleep, and Emily was, she was quiet, as always." Miss Marple pressed gently. "Quiet can sometimes mask deeper emotions." "How has Emily been behaving recently, especially after Oliver's accident?" Eleanor sighed, her expression pained. "Emily has always been different, but after Oliver, she became even more withdrawn. Sometimes I worry she doesn't fully understand what's happening around her." Miss Marple offered a reassuring smile. "Children can be quite perceptive, Eleanor. Their actions often speak louder than their words." As she left the infirmary, Miss Marple's mind raced. The petrol bottle was a clear indication of arson, but who would have wanted to harm Eleanor and Emily, and why? The timing suggested a connection to the recent tragedies that had befallen the family. That evening, Miss Marple attended the village meeting held in the local church hall, where villagers discussed the fire and offered support to the Thomases. She observed the attendees with her usual acuity, noting the subtle interactions and unspoken concerns. Mrs. Baker, the village baker, whispered to Mrs. Green, the postmaster's wife, "I heard it was the third tragedy in the Thomases' lives. It's just dreadful what's happened to them." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, but kept her focus sharp. She noticed Emily's absence from the gathering, which struck her as unusual given the child's previous behaviour. Her curiosity piqued. She approached Henry once more after the meeting. "Henry, may I have a word?" she asked privately. He looked up, gratitude evident in his tired eyes. "Of course, Miss Marple." Miss Marple chose her words carefully. "I found a bottle of petrol amidst the ruins of your home. That's quite significant. Do you know if there was any reason someone might want to harm you or your family?" Henry shook his head, perplexed. "No, there's no one I can think of who would wish us harm. We've always been well regarded in the village." She pressed on gently. "Sometimes those closest to us can harbour hidden feelings. It might be worth considering if there have been any recent changes or tensions within your household." Henry looked troubled. "I suppose Emily has been difficult, but I never imagined it would escalate to this." Miss Marple offered a reassuring smile. "I believe that with time and understanding we can uncover the truth behind these unfortunate events. Please know that you're not alone in this." As she left, Miss Marple's resolve strengthened. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, and she was determined to find the missing links. The presence of petrol, the timing of the fire, and Emily's enigmatic behaviour all pointed towards a deeper, more sinister plot. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple sat by the fire, reflecting on the day's discoveries. Willowbrook, with its charming streets and friendly faces, had once again revealed a hidden darkness. She knew that unraveling the Thomases' plight would require patience, insight, and a deep understanding of human nature, the very traits that had made her such a formidable investigator. As the night deepened and the village settled into its silent slumber, Miss Marple's thoughts remained with the Thomases. She was certain that the answers lay just beneath the surface, waiting to be unearthed by her diligent and compassionate mind. With a final glance at the flickering flames in her own hearth, she resolved to delve deeper, ready to illuminate the shadows that threatened to engulf her neighbours. Chapter 5. An unsettling discovery. Spring had barely begun to breathe life into Willowbrook when Miss Marple received Mr. Henry Thomas's earnest request. The village, with its charming cottages and blooming gardens, seemed an unlikely place for such dark undertones, yet Miss Marple sensed that beneath its serene exterior Henry decided to tidy the upper floor of their cottage, a task that had been neglected in the chaos of welcoming the twins. The first floor, where Oliver often played, was a hub of activity, while the upper floor had become a quiet sanctuary for Eleanor and Emily. As Henry climbed the narrow staircase, the wooden steps creaked under his weight, a familiar sound that now seemed ominously foreboding. Meanwhile, Eleanor was downstairs, soothing Lily after a minor scrape during one of her adventurous explorations. Oliver, ever the curious boy, tugged at her sleeve, eager to show her a new discovery in the garden. "Mum, look, I found a ladybug," he exclaimed, his eyes shining with excitement. Eleanor smiled, gently lifting him into her arms. "That's wonderful, Oliver. Let's take her inside so she can stay warm." As she carried her son towards the window, Henry continued his work upstairs, unaware of the impending tragedy that was about to unfold. The twins' laughter echoed faintly from below, a sweet contrast to the growing storm outside. Suddenly a loud crash shattered the calm. Startled, Henry turned to see a cascade of ornaments tumbling from a high shelf. He hurried to secure the remaining decorations, his heart pounding with unease. "Must be the wind," he muttered to himself, though the windows were firmly shut against the storm. Later that evening, as twilight gave way to night, the Thomases settled into their usual routine. Eleanor read a bedtime story to the twins, her voice a soothing melody in the quiet house. Oliver and Lily nestled into their cradles, their breaths steady and peaceful. Emily sat quietly nearby, her gaze fixed on the flickering fireplace, lost in her own thoughts. Henry retired to his study, a room now adorned with family photographs and mementos. He glanced at the clock, noting the late hour, and decided to check on the children before retiring himself. Ascending the staircase once more, he moved with a sense of purpose, ensuring that all was well. As he reached the first floor, a chilling sight greeted him. Oliver, who had been asleep in his cradle, lay motionless on the floor, his tiny body sprawled unnaturally. A gasp escaped Henry's lips as he rushed to his son's side, his mind racing with fear and confusion. "Oliver?" he cried, gently shaking the child. There was no response. Panic surged through him as he dashed downstairs, calling for Eleanor. The twins' peaceful slumber was now marred by the lifeless form of their beloved son. Eleanor rushed into the room, her face pale with shock and despair. "Henry, what's happened?" Tears welled in his eyes as he knelt beside Oliver, his heart breaking. "He's fallen, Eleanor. From the first floor. I'm so sorry." Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth, stifling a sob. "How? We made sure the windows were secure." Henry shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't understand. He was just sleeping." The room was thick with grief, the joyous atmosphere of the past months now overshadowed by an unbearable loss. Villagers gathered at the Thomases' doorstep, offering their condolences and support. Miss Marple, ever observant, watched from a distance, her eyes thoughtful, as she took in the scene of sorrow. As the days passed, the tragedy cast a long shadow over the Thomases. Oliver's absence left a void that seemed impossible to fill, and the once vibrant home now echoed with silent mourning. Eleanor withdrew further into herself, her grief compounded by the unanswered questions that lingered in the wake of the accident. Miss Marple, sensing the family's distress, found herself pondering the circumstances surrounding Oliver's death. There was something unsettling about the fall, an inexplicable element that tugged at her intuition. She resolved to keep a closer watch on the Thomases, her mind already weaving the threads of a mystery that seemed to lie just beneath the surface of their seemingly idyllic life. One evening, as snowflakes began to dance outside the cottage windows, Miss Marple visited the Thomases under the guise of offering her sympathies. Her presence, always gentle and unassuming, brought a measure of comfort to the grieving family. "I'm so very sorry for your loss," she said softly, her eyes meeting Henry's with a depth of understanding. "Thank you, Miss Marple," Henry replied, his voice heavy with sorrow. "It's been a difficult time." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the window where the remnants of the storm still lingered. Sometimes tragedies reveal themselves in the most unexpected ways. If there is anything you need, please don't hesitate to let me know. As she left, Miss Marple's keen mind was already at work, dissecting the events that had transpired. The fall, the secure windows, the unusual circumstances, it all hinted at something more sinister lurking beneath the surface of Willowbrook's peaceful exterior. She made a mental note to observe the Thomases closely, certain that the answers to Oliver's untimely death lay hidden within the intricate tapestry of their lives. Back in the quiet of the Thomases' cottage, Eleanor cradled Lily, her tears flowing freely as she mourned the loss of her son. Henry sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, both of them enveloped in a shared grief that bound them closer even as it tore at their hearts. The village of Willowbrook, with its gentle charm and close-knit community, now held a deeper mystery, one that Miss Marple was determined to unravel, guided by her unwavering belief in the subtle truths hidden within human nature. As the snow continued to fall, blanketing the village in white, the Thomases faced an uncertain future. Their once harmonious home was now a place of sorrow and unanswered questions, with Miss Marple standing as the silent guardian, ready to illuminate the shadows that threatened to engulf their lives. Chapter 4. Flames of Suspicion. Winter's grip had not yet loosened its hold on Willowbrook when tragedy struck once more. The village, draped in a shawl of frost and silence, seemed to hold its breath as the Thomases faced yet another devastating loss. It was a bleak January morning when Mr. Henry Thomas left for his duties at the school, unaware that the very sanctuary of his home would soon be consumed by flames. The cottage, usually a beacon of warmth and laughter despite recent sorrows, was enveloped in smoke and chaos. Neighbors were the first to notice the billowing smoke rising against the pale winter sky, a stark contrast to the usual tranquility of Maple Lane. By the time the fire brigade arrived, the fire had already devoured much of the structure, leaving charred remains where a happy home once stood. Mrs. Eleanor Thomas and their adopted daughter Emily were swiftly moved to the local infirmary, their faces pale and eyes filled with shock. The villagers, ever compassionate, rallied around the Thomases, offering blankets, meals, and heartfelt condolences. Yet, amidst the outpouring of support, a murmur of unease began to stir. The fire, many whispered, seemed too conveniently timed, casting a shadow of doubt over the idyllic facade of Willowbrook. Miss Marple, who had observed the unfolding events from her quaint cottage at the edge of the village, felt a familiar twinge of suspicion. Her sharp eyes mirrored his father's, while Lily's delicate features and gentle smile seemed to reflect her mother's grace. "They're perfect, Henry," she whispered, leaning into his embrace. "I can't believe how lucky we are." Henry smiled, a warmth in his heart that he hadn't felt since before their loss. "Indeed, Eleanor, it's as if the garden itself is celebrating their arrival." As the weeks passed, the Thomases settled into their new rhythm. Oliver and Lily thrived under their parents' attentive care, their giggles and coos adding a delightful melody to the household. Emily, now a year into her adoption, began to show subtle signs of change. While she still exhibited her characteristic seriousness, there were moments when her eyes lingered a little too long on the twins, her gestures tinged with a complexity that concerned Henry and Eleanor. The Harvest Festival approached, an annual tradition that brought the entire village together in a jubilant celebration of the season's bounty. This year the Thomases decided to host a grand party in their expansive garden, a gesture of gratitude for the blessings they had received. Invitations were sent to every household in Willowbrook, ensuring that no friend or neighbour was left out. Preparation for the party was a communal effort. Mrs. Baker, the village baker, delivered freshly baked scones and pastries, while Mr. Davies, the local carpenter, assisted with setting up tables and chairs. The garden was adorned with strings of fairy lights and lanterns, their soft glow promising an enchanting evening. Miss Marple, the venerable spinster with an eye for detail, arrived early to lend a hand. Clad in her favourite floral dress, she moved gracefully among the preparations, her presence a comforting constant for the Thomases. "Everything looks splendid, Henry," she remarked, arranging a bouquet of wildflowers. "You and Eleanor have outdone yourselves." Henry nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Miss Marple. We wanted to make this a special night for everyone." As dusk settled, the garden transformed into a scene of rustic elegance. Lanterns cast a warm light over the assembled guests, whose faces shone with smiles and the anticipation of good company. Children darted about, their laughter echoing through the evening air, while adults mingled, sharing stories and enjoying the delightful array of food. Eleanor moved gracefully from group to group, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd to ensure everyone felt welcome. Henry stood by the refreshment table, engaged in conversation with Mr. Green, the village postmaster. Yet amidst the revelry, Emily remained aloof. She lingered near the perimeter of the garden, her gaze fixed on the twins as they played beneath the old oak tree. Her usual reserve had deepened, and a shadow seemed to linger behind her bright eyes. Miss Marple observed this with her characteristic acuity. She noted the subtle tension in Eleanor's smile and the way Henry's laughter occasionally faltered when he glanced toward Emily. "There seems to be something on your mind, Henry," she remarked quietly as they stood together beneath the twinkling lights. Henry sighed, glancing toward his daughter. "Emily has always been a bit different, but lately I can't help but worry that she feels overshadowed by the twins." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Children can be remarkably perceptive. Perhaps she senses the changes in the household more deeply than we realize." Meanwhile, the party reached its zenith. Music floated from the gramophone, and the village band played lively tunes that had guests tapping their feet and clapping along. Oliver and Lily were the centre of attention, their joyful antics drawing smiles from even the most reserved attendees. As the night progressed, Miss Marple found herself engaged in conversation with Mrs. Pembroke, the local librarian. "I do hope young Emily finds her place," Mrs. Pembroke said, stirring her tea thoughtfully. "She's such a bright child, though she does seem rather stern at times." Miss Marple smiled gently. Children often wear their emotions differently. It's important to understand what lies beneath the surface. Later, as the festivities began to wind down and the last of the guests bid their farewells, Eleanor stood alone for a moment, watching the lanterns sway in the night breeze. Oliver and Lily had been tucked into their cradles, their breaths steady and peaceful. She felt a pang of gratitude mixed with an undercurrent of unease, a feeling that something was not entirely right despite the evening's success. Henry joined her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It was a lovely evening, wasn't it?" Eleanor nodded, her gaze drifting to where Emily stood quietly by the garden gate. "Yes, but I can't help but feel there's more to her distant behaviour than we understand." Miss Marple, having bid her good night, lingered a moment longer before departing. As she walked away, her sharp eyes took in the tableau before her, a family united yet subtly divided beneath the serene facade of Willowbrook's idyllic setting. She made a mental note to keep a closer watch on the Thomases, sensing that the arrival of the twins had stirred emotions that might soon reveal deeper complexities. As the Thomases retreated into their home, the village of Willowbrook settled into its tranquil night, unaware of the silent tensions that now lay beneath its peaceful surface. Miss Marple, ever the silent guardian, pondered the delicate balance of human emotions, ready to unravel the threads should they begin to unravel the harmonious tapestry of village life. The Thomases, enveloped in the warmth of their guests' goodbyes, felt a fleeting sense of normalcy. Yet as Eleanor glanced once more at Emily's solitary figure, a quiet apprehension settled in her heart. The seeds of jealousy, sown in the shadows, had begun to take root, and only time would reveal the extent of their growth. Chapter 3. Tragedy strikes. Winter had laid its soft blanket over Willowbrook, the village transforming into a serene tableau of frost-kissed gardens and smoke curling lazily from chimneys. The Thomases' cottage, nestled at the end of Maple Lane, stood resilient against the chill, its windows glowing warmly against the early evening dusk. Inside, the household was a flurry of activity. Oliver and Lily, the charming twins, were the centre of attention, their laughter and playful antics infusing the home with life and joy. Eleanor moved gracefully from room to room, tending to the twins with a mother's loving diligence, while Henry managed the household affairs with his usual calm efficiency. Emily, now 4 years old, had settled into her role within the family, though her reserved nature remained. She observed the twins with a quiet intensity, her interactions with them tinged with an inexplicable tension that Eleanor and Henry endeavoured to understand. Despite their growing family, the shadows of their past still lingered, whispering unease beneath the surface of their daily lives. One crisp December morning, the village awoke to the news of an impending snowstorm. The forecast promised heavy snowfall and biting winds, prompting villagers to secure their homes and prepare for the worst. The Thomases, however, remained optimistic, their spirits buoyed by the recent addition of the twins and the warmth that filled their home. On a particularly frosty afternoon,